ず企業が守られないために新陳代謝が流されていくと、優れた企業がどんどん前行ってもらって、でこちらで敗れた企業はその縮小せざるを得ない、日本人で感覚化するとなんとここ救ってあげてっていうものかもしれないんですけれども、スウェーデン政府は救わないですね。日本の場合は製造業で非常に20世紀的なものづくりが全盛だった時代の産業としては大成功を収めたし、それで21世紀まで来てしまっていることに今度は逆にそれが問題化していると。労働者や資源はこちらの産業からより伸びていく産業に移っていかなければいけないんですよね。それがその仕組み日本にはないんですよ。潰れそうです売れないとか企業が、経済学でよくゾンビ企業って呼ばれたりもするんですけれども、今回の雇用調整助成金、にしてもですね、個人に払うんじゃなくて企業に払われるので、その自分はこの企業を通じて支えられるわけですよね。政府がこう支えてくれるので、その企業の存続をですね。だからやっぱりだんだん左前になってきてももうなんとか生き残っていけるみたいな産業の姿をより高度化しながら日本経済がこう成長していく軌道に乗せていくにはどうするか、この問題を解かないと難しいと思います。
そもそも会社とは何なのか。脱工業化の時代、会社と人の関係の再定義も求められている。そこに生産性の鍵もあるのか。
What is that figure?
Okay, what we have here is combined heat and power plant where we use residuals from forestry and sawmills like sawdust, bark, tops and branches to produce district heating and electricity.
この大手エネルギー会社は30年にわたり稼働させてきた石炭火力発電所を閉鎖。2020年に新たな方向へと舵を切った。
We took that out of operation 2 years ago because from this plant we had fossil CO2 emissions to the atmosphere. And we have replaced it now with a CSP plant with biomass. It was a huge investment. It was an investment, you can compare it with, it's always a great investment when you're constructing new plants, but it's normal. It took 3 years to build it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no subsidies?
Not for the plants. Some of them has been working earlier with other technologies in other plants, for example the gas works here in Stockholm. So that's interesting. When we are thinking about reusing and recycling of the things and material and substances and so, but we're also working with reuse technologies and knowledges and ideas and so. So that's recycling as well.
Yes.
So,
People, human resources.
Exactly. So we use the competence from old technologies and put that in a new context.
新技術への投資だけではなく、労働者に蓄積された技能は新たな産業で活用される。環境変化への適応が人にも求められる。その中心にある理念は、
Och vi gör vi intervjun på engelska eller svenska? Min japanska är mycket dålig.
過去に財務大臣も務め、型破りな発想で知られた経済学者がスウェーデンモデルの仕組みを解き明かす。
So the Swedish and I would say all the Nordic countries are fairly open. We have a highly competitive free market, but obviously then we combine that with a well-organized labor market with strong unions and responsible social partners and the welfare state. So it's a kind of a couple of dimensions. What I think from the Swedish experience, you can really combine growth and social cohesion fairly well. In Sweden, there has been always a lot of investment in education and the quality of the labor force. Secondly, I would also mention the fact that we have a very dynamic labor market where the combination of low cost for hiring and firing and a well-developed welfare system means that people are willing to change jobs and also go into entrepreneurial companies. So it's a little paradoxical that a high-tax welfare state is also very dynamic. If you compare us to the US, the Swedish labor market has been fairly efficient in guaranteeing everybody real wage increases. Over the last 20 years, people have gotten some 50% in real wage increases.
市場の高い競争力と実質賃金の持続的な上昇を達成するスウェーデン。それを支える理論があるという。
There are some basic features from the real Maiden model that is still in place.
1950年代にスウェーデンで生まれた経済モデル。産業ごとに労働組合と経営者連盟がその年の賃金を決める。同じ職種でも生産性の低い企業と高い企業がある。だがどちらにも同じ賃金を支払うことが求められる。すると生産性が低いままの企業は淘汰され、失業者は生産性の高い企業へ移行していくことになる。
All companies and all branches, they're all getting the same wage increase, meaning that productive firms is getting a relatively small wage increase compared to its productivity, while unproductive firms have to pay the same wage increase. It's difficult for companies that are not that productive. They really need to invest in automation and upskilling of the workers, otherwise they won't survive. So it's making Sweden more competitive.
Companies' competition is quite hard nowadays.
Yeah.
Does this affect you? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the expectations on the workers are that everyone in a company are always very high and they keep growing all the time. Because obviously you need to be efficient, you need to be better than everyone else and always stay on your toes. So yeah, it's tough work these days for most people, but also it's fun and it's nice because you continue to develop yourself and you can really see results when you work hard as well.
Swedish economy has been quite strong and especially in Stockholm, so even though companies come and go, it doesn't really affect the ability of getting a new job. In software development, people change jobs every 6 months or every year.
So we've tried to protect people rather than companies. People feel that change is actually good and we take care of the ones that are bearing the burden of change and try to get them into new jobs. Yeah, not capitalism. It's not capitalism and it's not socialism. It's a combination of market economy and a social market economy.
人も技術も市場で再利用するという発想がこの国の生産性を支える。そこで問われるのは競争と福祉のバランスだ。成長、分配、生産性、循環、脱工業化の時代にスウェーデンの試みから日本が学ぶべき本質とは。
Capitalism is not just characterized by
private ownership, but also by the constant valorization of capital, like Marx defined capital as gay, big, gay, and this is process of valorization is basically endless. But I also understand that you're afraid that this negative connotation of communism is really bad, and we don't want to go back to communism, etc. But I also don't want to go back to Soviet Union. That is also obvious. So what I'm actually suggesting is something very simple. It's the rehabilitation of the commons. What I mean is like this. So basically, in pre-capitalist societies, what people need, what everyone needs for living was a communal property like lands, water, forests, and these are accessible to everyone because everyone needs them to live. In that sense, this wealth was naturally scarce but socially abundant. What's happening under capitalism is totally the opposite. We can produce so much more, so the things are naturally abundant, but because of the private ownership and the monopoly by capital, wealth becomes socially scarce. That's the fundamental problem of capitalism, creating artificial scarcity. As a result, we need money today for making living, and we have to work for such a long hours, but we still suffer from the low wages and etc. If we can sort of rehabilitate the communal luxury of the commons, I mean, like more concretely, like free education, free Medicare, free public transportation, and free, water, etc. And we basically agree with this point that
under capitalism. Without a revolution, without a bloodshed.
To some extent, but not everything. And
No, everybody has free education.
In Europe, to some extent, but especially like big countries in US or in the UK or even countries like Japan, we have a lot of student loan and tuition.
Yeah, but you have to admit that within capitalism, it is absolutely possible to have free education, very much subsidized, transport and healthcare. There is not one successful example of this naive table planned communism. It never worked anywhere. Maybe Cuba, you could argue that somehow, but even there they have nothing to eat. That's not a good way forward.
Well, no, but I agree. But my point is that the neoliberalism basically dissolved the abundance of the commons, right? So why don't we have to? We need to reverse this point. We have to increase those communal wealth. We agree this point.
No. There's this very classical example, 2,000 years old. Aristotle came up with it. It's called the tragedy of commons. There, you know this example, I suppose. The fields that were a common property were overgazed and overdrawn. Nobody invested in it, nobody repaired in it. Everybody just took, just like the communists did from our ground. They took the precious everything we had and send it to Soviet Union. I know you don't advocate this system. I think nobody does, and I think that's the great point. We've tried it. We've tried it in Czech Republic. We're not stupid people. Russians are also not stupid people. We are as clever as everybody else, and as clever as we are, it everywhere ended in a disaster. And I'm absolutely for changing capitalism. In fact, I am a big critique of what I call growth capitalism.
Right.
And capitalism can be without growth. It's just a new sort of an image that we have planted by neoliberals that it has to grow.
I think that's
it doesn't have to grow.
That's where our difference exists, and I think this is a very important point. But actually, maybe we are imagining something similar, right? We describe it, I call it degrowth communism, and you call it capitalism without growth.
But that's a big difference. I think there is a fundamental difference. I would not... of course, I am almost allergic to the word communism,
right.
But for historic reasons, of course. But also, on the other hand, I know what you're talking about because Joseph Schumpeter, an economist, who is very hard to say whether he was left or right. He's one of my favorite. I don't know if you know him, but I'm quite sure you do. He actually lived in Czech Republic back in the day.
That's
Or in the lands that today is Czech Republic. And he came up with this idea of the merger of communism and capitalism.
イノベーションという言葉の生みの親として知られるヨーゼフ・シュンペーター。
This is actually the word Schumpeter. I think the most beautiful argument in Schumpeter is that capitalism, sort of this argument that capitalism has no alternative, because capitalism, in a way, you could argue, is an alternative to itself.
彼は資本主義の可能性を創造的破壊に見た。絶えざる変化こそが社会を活性化させる。だが
資本主義は経済的な失敗ゆえに崩壊するのではない。まさにその成功ゆえに土台である社会制度を揺さぶり、自ら存続不能に陥る。社会主義へと向かう状況が必然的に訪れるのだ。
ダイナミックな変化が生んだ豊かな社会は次第に階層を固定化させ、独占、寡占、官僚化という弊害が目立ち始める。人々の意識も変化していくというのだ。そして
物事や人の心は基本的に自動的に社会主義へと向かっていく。
変わる人々の意識、社会の変化、人と社会の関係にはどこか皮肉なパラドックスがあるのかもしれない。
And we are also looking for a better system. I am, of course, for regulation. I mean, even the libertarians are for some kind of regulation. I mean, some kind of regulation of dangerous chemicals, for example. And nobody would argue with that. Now, the question is the limit of that. Okay, so how would you say that we should ban, for example, coal production? Okay, I agree with that. But if we do that from tomorrow, it's exactly the poor people who will suffer the first. So, of course, you and I will agree that we have to do this slowly. We can't just, ban. If we ban SUVs, and I think it's a stupid idea to own an SUV in a city, and I actually think people are laughing about it. I mean, people who SUVs, they're not no longer the heroes that the girls like to jump into their cars. It's becoming ridiculous. These people are. What are you thinking? I mean, what's your problem? Why do you have to use 4 tons? Exactly. So I think this is the way forward, and this is exactly it's happening. We are in sort of a little bit in the sort of communist terminology. We are experiencing a capitalist perestroika.
But my point is that those regulations are not well suited to the capitalist production. How to shut down those fossil industry in 10 or 20 years, and how to produce renewable energies, and how to downscale the number of cars so that everything becomes sustainable and everything stay within the planetary boundaries. And I think that's really a new planned economy. That's not capitalism anymore.
Okay, so let's clarify here what we understand under socialism and what we understand under communism. To me, socialism is tax manipulation of production, let's say. So I tax something that I don't want to be produced or don't want to be consumed: alcohol, tobacco, gas, high excise taxes,
carbon taxes,
while education, art, healthcare is subsidized. That to me is socialism. That to me is fine. I like that.
Okay.
Communism is common ownership of property. You cannot decide what to do with your money. Some central authority will do that. It's like you only have, let's say, 5% of your income to choose yourself, and 95% is government That to me is communism. What do we have in Europe and also in Japan is 40-60, yeah? 40% of in Europe it's around 40%. So 40% of what I earn, let's imagine I earn 100 units, 40 of that go to taxes, and a politician decides healthcare, arts, education, whatever. I cannot decide that. I can decide that with voting.
Yeah.
But I cannot decide, right? And so that's to me is socialism.
And
in
you
Japan,
are fine with socialism.
I am fine with socialism, yeah.
And it's kind of.
I would not go more than 50% though. I think the breaking point here is 50%. But that's just my gut feeling. How do you feel about this?
Oh yeah. I totally support socialism too. But what I want to say is a communal property, but that doesn't have to be controlled by bureaucrats in the central government. That can be more managed in a decentralized manner. Like for example, the solar panels can be, managed cooperatively. It doesn't have to be private ownership, but it doesn't have to be state ownership. It can be managed communally, right? So I think we can also expand this realm of communal ownership without state ownership, centralized state ownership, using, of course, those new technologies, digital technologies. So my goal would be kind of mixture of communism and socialism. Things that must be provided by the state should be free, but also accessible to everyone, like education, Medicaid, public transportation. But also the companies can be, controlled more in the equal and democratic manner without the big boss capitalists, but they can be cooperatively managed and owned by the workers. So if we increase the numbers of those corporations as well as the free basic services, the realm of the market will be significantly smaller. And in that case, I wouldn't call that kind of society capitalism anymore, because the functioning of the market will be something totally different. Of course, we still, buy and exchange those certain amount of products that can be commodified, but what's essential remain decommodified, and also what's bad for or destructive for the environment are communally or stately or by the state banned or prohibited. We need a very different kind of system and the principles of organization.
Okay. I don't think we need a different system.
医療、水道、自然環境など製造のために重要な要素を共同で運営する。だとしても一体誰が何をどこまで管理するのか。政府でも民間でもなく市民という名の人々が共同管理すればいいのか。そこに人々の合意、集団の意思決定の問題が残る。起業家精神や成長のダイナミズムについて探求し続けた経済学の巨人シュンペーターだが、集団の意思決定について面白いことを言っている。
権力の中枢やその周辺にいる人々は短期的な視点を取らざるを得ない。長期的な目標のために一貫して国益に尽くすことは至難の業となる。故に民主主義の主張は手綱を握るだけで精一杯で行き先を自分で決められない騎手のようだ。または自分の部隊を命令通りに動かすことだけに気を取られ、戦略は場当たり的という将軍にも例えられるかもしれない。
どこまで私たちは民主的であり続けられるのか。市場の論理を超えて民主的な運営を試みるとき、誰が何をどこまでやるのか。 精神の発祥の地、際限なく拡大する市場の論理への警鐘を鳴らす人物がいる。
We have digital spaces that, if they don't become commons, they're going to end up owned by Mr. Zuckerberg, and then we will just all be info proletarians or info peasants of some dystopic feudal lord.
ギリシャ経済危機の際に財務大臣も経験した経済学者が市場に民主主義を導入する方法を語る。
In 2021, Mark Zuckerberg audaciously announced his plan to convert Facebook into what he calls a metaverse, in which people meet in their millions using avatars as their representation in that digital space, and they do all sorts of things, not just gaming, but they transact, they construct economies, they chat, they change views, they hang out. And if you think that Facebook already contains 2 billion people plus, the prospect is there for a large segment of humanity of moving into a digital commons. But it's not a commons, because it will be owned by Mark Zuckerberg. And we applauded him, which should really make us worry about ourselves. In the United States, there was a lot of talk this year on how to civilize big tech, how to regulate, for instance, Facebook. If we really want to democratize corporations and to reduce their exorbitant power over the rest of us, we need to look at their ownership structure. We need to break down and democratize the ownership of corporations. We could move to a system where we don't have tradable shares, that shares are like library cards. You have one, you use it. When you stop using it, you give it to somebody else, or you hand it in. If you can be fired, you can be hired. When you are hired, you're given one of these votes. When you are fired, it's taken away from you. So as long as you work for a corporation, then you have one share and one vote in it. Markets are wonderful things. When I go to a farmer's market and there are 20 different stalls from which I can choose tomatoes, I feel that I have choice, and and the way in which prices fluctuate towards the end of the market day, so that they get rid of all the products that have not been sold so far. It's boisterous, it's empowering, it's a community, it allows for the efficient use of resources when it comes to making tomatoes or selling them and so on. Now the problem with capitalism is that most people identify in their minds capitalism with markets, and yet this is not so. The market for tomatoes is very different from the market for derivatives and money and Wall Street or Amazon.com. Adam Smith, who waxed lyrical about the liberating aspect of the market and the efficiency of the market, was adamant. He was utterly against public limited companies that belong to anonymous shareholders. So it is not interesting that the patron saint of capitalism is against what today is capitalism. The reason why he was against it, he could see that the moment you start having companies that belong to anonymous shareholders and shares become a kind of liquid money that is transacted anonymously, then it will be concentrated, and we will reach the state we are in today, where 90% of companies listed in the New York Stock Exchange belong to 3 companies. BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. They own 90% of American public companies. That's detrimental to the market. This is monopoly capitalism. This is not a market-based capitalism. take the money market and the labor market out of the system, in other words, remove capitalism, then you end up with markets that potentially can be far closer to Adam Smith's idea of the community market, of the farmers market, of a market that is by people, for the people, and that works competitively.
市場を民主主義の実践の場と捉えるとき、経済学の父の言葉の重みも変わる。見えざる手より労働の分割を、働く喜びを分かち合い交換し合う場としての市場は今どこに。
So I propose the concept of communal luxury and radical abundance because people usually get freaked out when they hear the word degrowth because they think that they will be poor simply because economy is not growing.
And also the word communism does the same association.
Sure.
So you've chosen really two bad words, I think. but
intentionally combined, of course. But,
okay.
So when I propose this concept, I think the shortening of working hour could be a very good example to overcome the artificial scarcity of time created by capital. The work by Keynes, he predicted that our work time will be 15 hours per week by year 2030. But we are in now 2022 and we are still working so hard. And the work hour didn't decrease because we work for further economic growth, right? So basically capital enslaved us to the work. No matter how high the productivity became, we are still enslaved to work.
But you don't have to. I mean, you can work 2 days a week. Everybody can go to the forest, live off potatoes that they grow themselves, and fine. Nobody's going to complain. Everybody's going to maybe even write books about them. This was not possible during communism. You could not have capitalist experiments.
But also,
this is why these two systems are not even comparable.
No, but even in capitalism, you cannot just grow your potato because those lands will be those lands is also privately owned, and you cannot steal someone's land, right? So when every land is already become the private property, and you cannot really imagine a way.
So you advocate that the land should be common property, like during communism, really?
No. What I'm saying simply that I'm saying that in Japan, for example, or people living in the capitalism, they do not have such a possibility of simply going to the forest and live without any dependence on the market. This engine is actually driven by the profit making, and the profit making leads to the economic growth. So in this bad circular, we will end up destroying the earth.
Churchill once said, it's not a very good ship. It's a slow ship, but it will never sink. So these ideas to change the system, and I support Greta in her criticism, but if you want to change the system from A to B, you also need to know how B works. And it's an experiment that's really dangerous to take radically. We really need to have patience here and do it slowly, and it's happening.
かつてイギリスの首相チャーチルは言った。民主主義は最悪の制度だ。ただし他のすべての政治体制を除いての話だが、第二次大戦中ヒトラーのファシズムと戦い続けた男の言葉だ。同じ頃シュンペーターもまた世界が雪崩を打って壊れていく時代にあえて資本主義社会主義と並べて民主主義の価値を考え続けたのだった。危機の時代にあった彼らに倣って今私たちは資本主義社会主義それぞれの根幹にある成長と 分配に加え、それらを支える民主主義を考えなくてはならないのだろう。民主主義を礎とする生産性の理念が心に響いてこそ、初めて人的資本への投資が叫ばれる時代の生産性の世界が開かれるのかもしれない。
I think it is at a turning point. I don't think it's coming to an end. Capitalism is a way of tapping the enterprise and innovativeness of human beings, and we want to tap into that. We want to sustain that. But exactly how it operates and what's the mix of private sector and government and commons approaches, that's in a way something that is bound to change over time and is for every democratic country to have a public debate about with their government. But it's not obvious whether the forces of good or the forces of evil are going to win there.
蝶は今日も舞う。静かに羽音を立てることもなく、世界のどこかでそのかすかな羽ばたきを感じ取れるか。私たち自身の感受性が試されているのかもしれない。
So there's a lot of degrowth which is necessary, not just for the planet, but also for our soul. And there are a lot of other things that must grow, like, renewable energy, like education, like social care, like, culture. Yeah, I want a lot more poetry, I want a lot more music. So we should not think of growth versus degrowth, but also we should think of in terms of what we need more of, and what we should do less with.
And that means taking out the structural dependency upon endless growth from our economies. How do we do that? We don't yet know the answer, but we know it is a critical question, and I believe far more economists and economic students and politicians should be looking at that.
アダム・スミスの時代から遠く離れて、資本主義は変わり続け、富を生むルールもまた変わり続ける。物からこと、ことから時へ、人間性や創造性まで商品と言われる時代の可能性と恐ろしさは背中合わせだ。成長、分配、生産性、循環、繁栄、そして幸福、それぞれの夢と思いを託す言葉が行き交い、すれ違っていく。新しい明日のためにも過去と対話し、自らの欲望を見つめて、欲望に終わりはない。欲望をめぐる旅も終わらない。
これからね、メタバースの世界と絶対来るわけですよ。僕らがほっといても勝手にそういう世界が来るわけですよ。全部書かないの。
デジタル経済の勝者は誰だ。過熱する競争の最前線を追う。
Certainly the state monopoly on money is over.
欲望の資本主義、メタバースの衝撃、デジタル経済のパラドックス。21日日曜夜10時 BS1。
圧倒的にそれの方が面白そうなんだけどまあ今ね、資本主義とか言って、なんだろう、地球を壊すとか言ってたんですけど、それも結局なんだろうな、そういう物語で自己実現したい人のおもちゃに過ぎないっていう気がしますよね。そうやって言われるんじゃないかな、未来で。わかんないけど、 まあ今言われてるけど、まあそうですねうんまあなんだろうね、守りたいものなんてのが本当にあるのかって感じはしますよね、そういう人たちには。多分ないんですよ、嘘だから。なんだろうな、その友達とかもいろいろあるとは思うんですけど、地元の友達とかね、それも別に地元がなくなってもそいつらが生きてさえいればそいつらは友達なんで、それは交換不可能な時間を過ごしてきたわけじゃないですか、一応。6年も長ければ9年もずっと一緒にいるわけですよ。もうほぼ義務教育みたいな状態でね、ぶち込まれて、その村の中で。でそういうやつらを多少は守りたいは分かるんですけど、そいつらも勝手に生きてるし、僕らがそんな地球とか大それたこと言うまでもなしに生きてくれてるしっていう感じですよね。とかね、なんだろう、そいつらがなんで大事かっつうと、やっぱ人生で面白い、やっぱ人と話すことは普通に面白いですよ。それは自分よりバカなやつでも倫理感覚が僕もかなりない方ですけど、その哲学とかに全く関心のないやつでもちゃんと悩んでたり、ちゃんと考えてたり、自分なりに落としどころ見つけてたり、落としどころ見つけれてなかったり、このまま突き進むと死にそうなやつだったり、いろいろいるんですけど、そういういろいろなやつらの話を聞くのはそうは面白いですね、普通に。こうやって考えてるんだなとか、そういうのを聞いて、なんだろう、自分の糧にできればいいですけど、もっとね、要するに面白いカードですよ、カードを手放さないっていうことですね。手放したくないよねっていう、そのカード、人生のおもちゃがあればあるほどいいじゃないですか。だから共産主義とか言っちゃうとそれ以外のおもちゃ切っちゃう感じあるんで、それはなんかつまんないよね普通にっていう。おもちゃですね、人生の。友達も恋人も哲学もYouTube も。おもちゃをうまく使って人生楽しく生きようよっていう。でもちろんおもちゃとはいえね、人間はメンヘラなところがあるんで、そういうものに依存したり、そういうもので心が意外と持ってる部分とかあると思うんですよ。でもそれはあるにはあるんでしょうがないね。わかんないね。そんなところかな。そんな感じで自分が持ってるカードを使ってうまくいければいいんじゃないかなとか思いますよ。なんか普通に共産主義っていうおもちゃをもてあそぶと、なんだろうな、いろんなものを捨ててしまうっていうか、捨てない、わからない。でもトレードオフなんでね、捨てるものがあって得るものがあるし、得るものがあって捨てるものがあるっていうか、それはねあると思いますよ。斉藤浩平は今回なんかいろいろその学者連中の承認を捨てて、お金も儲けたし、一応こうやってテレビにも出るだけのなんかインパクト、そのプレゼンツ、その社会的な影響力、インフルエンスを得たっていうことじゃないですか。ぐらいですかね。と言ってそんなところかな。難しいね。これはちょっと僕答え出ないですね。その知識がなさすぎるんで、こういう大きい話はやっぱ苦手ですね。難しい。やっぱ小さい話になっちゃう、どうしても。大きい話っつってもでもかなり時代遅れな議論って気もしますけど、でもそのテクノロジーも踏まえて考えていくっていうことなんで、近いようなっていう。やっぱ苦手ですね。 マクロは。おのおのやるしかねえよっていう、もう分かりやすいことしか分かんないで、もうほんとトートロジーみたいなことしかできないんでね、もっと飛躍させていきたいですけどね、議論。はい。